at us.
You're live.
Okay, cool. Were you going to intro us, Robert, or are we
No, go for it.
introing ourselves? Okay, awesome. So, hey everybody, welcome. Ulysses Con online. Because of the everything going around in the world. Normally we'd like to go out in the world and do this face to face, but we're trying something a little bit different this time. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Our topic on this one is, running Torg. If you haven't done it before, if you're new to it, it's a scary game from the outside. There's a lot of moving pieces, both game mechanics and settings. Can be a little bit terrifying, and we want to help you out and be like, no, it's fine. You'll be okay. We'll get you in. There's going to be a lot of Torg panels where we talk about different things. Anyone that's been on a panel with me knows if you ask a question, I'm probably going to answer it, even if I shouldn't. So be advised. Hopefully there will be spoilers and fun and games, and hopefully we'll have a lively chat in there. And yeah, but there will be also very specific panels about certain topics, and those I might defer to later on. So I'll introduce everyone. I'll start with myself. I'm Darrell Hayhurst, former line editor. Now Greg Gordon's the line editor. Couldn't have picked anyone better. But I still write for it, and I still help out behind the scenes quite a bit. And you'll see my name on a lot of the books. Go ahead and do John next.
I'm John Watson. I'm a co-author of the source book for Tharcold and also Blood on the Blasted Lands with the source book of Darrell, Blood on the Blasted Lands with Brian and Lemon. I always mispronounce his name. And some other Ulysses Torg Eternity products as well.
And then the inimitable Brian. Go.
Hey, yeah, I'm Brian Reeves. I've been doing mainly adventure material with Ulysses Spiel for Torg Eternity for about 3 years now, starting with Fires of Ra. And I've written a few little things here and there as well, also for Pinnacle sometimes.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into it. We got a few pieces of general advice, and then hopefully people that are out there and nervous and worried and have questions will ask us stuff, and we'll go riffing on that. Yeah, anyone that's just joining, this is for new GMs who are wanting to get into Torg or maybe a little bit afraid of it. We're gonna help you do it. So I've got a bunch, but I'm gonna pitch to you guys first. See where if you've got something, you're like, oh, boom, let's start here. Sounds like no, so I'll go. So my first piece of advice: start small. There's there's 7 different cosms plus that you can start in. All of them have these different wrinkles and behaviors and all that. And this is we chose very specifically on the design side with day one to start small. Grab a piece of it and say, okay, you're going to start in Core Earth, and Core Earth, for the most part, is like the world outside your window, and that helps people acclimate. It gets you a feeling of where you are. The only real difference between our Earth and Core Earth is Core Earth is a little bit more action adventure-y. The things that you'd see in an action movie can really happen. So, in reality, if you tried to do some of that stuff, it would go very, very badly. But for Core Earth, you can get away with it. And once people get that, that's your feet on the ground, that's your starting point. And once you've got a starting point, then it's easier to layer on the crazy stuff, one layer at a time, for both yourself and your players. I see in the comments, Day One Living Land, New York is a great starting adventure. I agree. That was Aaron Pavao who wrote the original for that, and I tweaked it around a little bit, from playtesting and all that. But there's a big reason why that one's first. We want, A, it's a super exciting adventure, and B, it very rapidly brings you from 0 to Torg, together, both the GM and the players. So if you've got access to it, that Day One book is literally built to help people with this problem. And we try to layer the rules as well as the setting on that. So you're going to get deeper and deeper into it as you go. That's my first tip. Next.
It's also a good first taste for the players as well. If they don't know anything about the multiverse universe setting, that will help ease them in. And I feel like Living Land is really good for that too, just because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
pretty simple to understand and it's very different from Core Earth. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the day one adventures are very reliable, and then also shows the really cool thing about Torg is that you might be, just a normal like barista at a coffee shop, and then you get transformed in this really cool thing. Now you're a caveman or something like that, or some kind of knight, or
Mm-hmm.
even a cybernetic warrior. So I really like to show those kind of things, and very good starting point for the feel. And to Darrell's point, it's not like, well, here's 5 cosms as well. It's just going from core Earth to one, and that's a good start to building blocks upon that. And then you can get into more complex things, and might be running was it When Cosms Collide or something like that, which does
yeah,
explore
yeah.
other things.
Right, and that's where you move to. And so like the one nice thing too is like here's the if you're not using a day one, because there's reasons not to. And the big reason not to is the day ones are built for normal people like learning to experience this. So they're pre-generated characters rather than your own. And the reason you can't really use your own as well is because in normal Torg, all these characters are coming from all these different places. And if someone's got their own book and is like, I really want to play this crazy guy from Tharkold, fantastic, like awesome. You're halfway there already. If you don't have that, that's where a day one helps introduce them all so that people know what they're getting into later. But you can very easily start with a starting group and then just like we did on the design side, start with one and layer it on and let everybody bring their own items to it. And as a GM, and this is so hard, like as a GM, we feel a responsibility to understand every piece of the game and everything that's going on with the different
Yeah.
characters. I want to tell you, as a guy that's been writing this for 4 years, I don't know, like, I don't want to know everything about how your character works, right? I want that to be your responsibility. Like, so push some of that on the player and be like, hey, look, if you've got something special, you've got to tell me when it comes up. And just taking that little bit of pressure off yourself as a GM really helps you because you've got enough other things going on.
That's basically good advice for every role playing game out there.
Absolutely.
Make sure that the players
Yeah.
can understand their character well enough to feed you the information that they have on their character sheet as well.
So yeah, I see
Because
a great piece of it. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say the art of game mastering, storytelling, whatever you want to call it. It's a group effort. It's not just one person, especially with a game like Torg, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, and something I'll get into a little bit later with the cards is when you say
Same
group
here.
effort, the nice thing about how card play works is as long as you've got someone that's figured it out, they can be actively engaged in helping out everyone else. So not everyone has
Yeah,
to understand their hand at first. And
Mhm.
what's fun is as the group figures that out together, they'll get like more and more powerful. I see
absolutely.
there's a great comment on there. The advice: don't be afraid to cross the streams. Absolutely. Like even though, like I'm saying, hey, start simple. If someone wants to get crazy, off they go. Don't sweat it.
Yeah.
um. So my second piece of advice, and I do this in every game that I run at conventions and everything else. Mechanically, as a GM, because you want to get everything right and all that, there's the trickiest part for new players and new game masters to wrap their head around is how bonuses work with the dice in the bonus chart. And we tried to make it like this is why the bonus chart is on every character sheet on the bottom. The bookmarks that we put in the boxes have the bonus chart on it. So as a GM, I'll either have a spare character in front of me and just read off the sheet from that, or one of those bookmarks. Because as long as you've got that bonus chart, you're set, right? Roll the d20, look at it. There's my number. But the one that I hammer at the table over and over and over again is dice add to dice, bonuses add to bonuses. And if you can remember that, the math gets really easy. Because if what we're so used to from Dungeons and Dragons and other things is like, oh, I got a +2, or let's use an action card. I've got a +3 to this. Fantastic. And I roll my d20 and I get a 7. And then I add 3 to that and I see 10 and I look at the bonus chart and I'm like, wow, that's a 0. That +3 sucks. And it's like, no, it's a bonus. The bonus adds to the bonus, never to the die itself. You look at that 7 on the die, it's like a -1. Add 3 to that, now it's +2. Huge difference. That means you generally succeeded. And at the very first, people are trying to do it that Dungeons and Dragons way and get themselves in trouble. Over and over again, dice add to dice, bonuses add to bonuses. And that helps, I think, mechanically.
Yeah.
So I'd agree. That's usually what a lot of newer players, and even myself, struggled with at first. But believe it or not, gang, it has gotten better. If anybody played the old Torg, it was a little notorious for being clunky. So it's definitely a great improvement.
Yeah.
Really good.
Well, and so I'm going to speak a little bit for Shane here, and we're going to talk about this like probably tomorrow on our "What Were You Thinking" panel. But that was one of the design elements that Shane felt very strongly about, was that we make it inviting to new players, but it also still had to feel like Torg. And what I think he did so successfully is it does still feel like Torg. Like the bonus chart's the same as it used to be. The basic mechanics of it, they're the old game, but like kind of all the fat's been trimmed off, and anything that had that really you had to do mental gymnastics for, Shane tried to simplify that down, and it's gave the game masters at the table that get to reap the benefit from that.
Absolutely.
And I like to joke, Shane and I are both really lazy game masters. This is why we kind of write so in tune with one another. It's like, I don't want to do that at the table. I need the game to figure that out for me. And mechanically, that's how we're going to push it, and why I like to think that people are enjoying running it and playing it is because it's like, yeah, it's not fun if you've got to do all of that work. If we can lighten that load up enough to where you can engage with the story, like as a GM and a player, and like let that stuff take care of itself, so much more fun.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I find actually that my tolerance level for complexity, especially when it comes to managing all the little things, has really gone down since my 20s.
Oh, yeah. I agree with you 100%. That's what I was about to say. When I was younger, give me that crunch. As I'm older, I'm like, I just want to play the game. How does this work? Yeah.
I feel like the 90s were all about the crunch, but I feel like we've gotten into this more streamlined gaming now, and Torg is the Torg Eternity is on board with that.
Yeah, well, and I've noticed that too. And like there's a lot of different factors that I put it down to, like when you're in college, you want something different, right? Like, yeah, you want to get lost in those numbers, and also I think
a little more free time.
We've got a lot more free time. You've also got, you don't have the same dramatic chops that you do. So like you're just as engaged playing with all the numbers and the fidgety bits as you would be with the story. And then as you get older and you're better at the story stuff, you don't need those fidgety bits and they start getting in the way. And also for some of you, you got kids, you got other stuff, and you're like, I don't got 3 hours to prepare this game. Like if I can't run it in a couple of minutes, we're done for, right? So
yeah.
And the nice thing is the market's big enough. There are still games that scratch that itch for people that want it. And then there's games that are even lighter, than Torg. Lighter than Torg? Amazing.
Way lighter. Big time. Where I got my start, D6 by D6. One attribute, nothing else. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Right.
Well, yeah, kind of an interesting one, but don't want to get on that tangent. But yeah, I think, kind of going hand in hand with what you said, Darrell, one thing, having played in, one of your games that I thought was interesting is a GM that goes hand in hand with your, I'm a lazy GM thing, but it simplifies things and makes it easier, makes combat flow better, is that A lot of other systems do it. A mook rule where you kind of the generic bad guys, if you will, you kind of group them together where they have one combined hit point system, or call it what you will, health system. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
So it's
They
just less
call
to
them
manage.
mobs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just a Maba. Yeah, and it's just easier to manage, And I remember playing with you. I was like, that's a good idea. I actually never really have seen that in action. I've read about it. I was like, that worked really well. Seemed like you were just kind of relaxed instead of one of those GMs. You're like, okay, what do I, remembering all this, and
Oh, yeah.
less stress as a GM.
And it's a sidebar in the core book, so it's kind of easy to.
Yeah.
We made it optional, and it's one of those things where it's like there's a little bit of regret that we made it optional, but in some situations, if you've only got like a couple of these guys, you might as well track their shock. But when you've got a lot of them, just having one pile, and I'll use tokens or whatever, and I'll just pile the shock up, and it's so natural. Like at first, it feels weird, especially when you get like a fatigue result or something, and you're like, oh, like I got to take or someone did a huge amount of damage to one scrub, but didn't quite take him out. And then someone else does like one shock and their guy drops, and you're like, oh. but overall, it still works really good. It's just like, hey, that's the rhythm of it. And when you get into it, it's fine. And as a GM, oh man, it simplifies your life tremendously. Oh, I see someone says I'm amazing. Thank you so much. I agree. Yeah, mob rule. Yeah, so mob rules, Slaybar, that helps as a GM. One thing I'll talk about that I think a brand new to Torg GM can worry about, like one of the things that can be a barrier when you don't know any better, is the destiny cards and the action pool. Because you look at all the stuff that's going on here, and you're like, oh my god, all of these pieces that I need to understand. No, you don't. And this kind of goes back to my, hey, player needs to understand his own abilities or her own abilities, and their cards are the same. We tried, the card tells you what it does. So you don't need to do a lot of, hey, by the way, like that's a thing. Take a look at that. Does anybody have this card? Now, what we don't hold your hand on is there's a lot of combinations and cards that are more powerful than they seem in certain situations. But let your players discover that, slowly but surely. Like and this is one of the things that's interesting writing combats, or encounters and trying to balance them, is so much of it is based on card play that like a weak group with good card play can totally hit above their weight class. Whereas a brand new group that doesn't understand the card play, even with more powerful characters, will just get their butts kicked. And what you can get trapped at. Playing them. Yeah, exactly. What you can get trapped, right, writing these, thinking, oh man, like I'm used to playing with this strong card play group, so I'm gonna write this like really tough encounter. And then you play it with like a group of new players, and they're just getting slaughtered. And you're like, I have made a powerful mistake, and I need to roll this back a little bit. And that's why in every adventure we've got a sidebar. Like, here's your levers that you get to pull, right? Like to make things harder, to make things easier. Because we're mostly writing, we try to be inviting to that new GM, to that new player. We're not going to kill you right off the bat. And the other thing that you can rest assured at as a GM, if your players survive 3 rounds, they will win the fight. They just will. If you kill them in 3, well, okay, it's over, right? And hopefully you've got a plan B for that. Like, oh, this is going very badly, But if they can survive 3 rounds, they're going to win. Because after 3 rounds, they've got these massive action pools built up. And those massive action pools mean whatever they try is going to work. They're going to be doing automatic great hits with 3 or 4 bonus dice of damage. They got this, like practically against anything. And there's a few, like the only thing that's not true in, or what we label as the beta threats. So like if you see a squiggly thing in front of its name, don't throw it at a new group. like that will kill them. But anything else, no matter how strong it feels, it might hurt or kill one or two characters. But those that live to that third or fourth round, they're going to win. And it's going to feel great. Like that's the magic of that action pool. And there's always a pull towards tweaking with it. Like, oh, I want to give them an advantage or I want to change this and let it work the way it's supposed to. Where that first round, no one's got a card out. And so you can really feel like, oh man, this is tough. I can't hit anyone. Like, I'm going to get hurt. Like, this is really bad. Mm-hmm. And then that second round, things get a little bit better. Like, you're kind of getting over the hump. You know, third round, okay, someone's played some leadership out. We're filling up cards. It's kind of like in 13 Age, the escalation die. Like, this does that kind of feeling where the deeper you get into the combat, the broader your options start to get, and it's all based on that card play. And the nice thing is, once they're out of your hand and onto the table, and this is why the action pool part of it's important, that's when the other players can start seeing the combo options and being like, oh, hey, let me trade you that hero card. I've got 2 drama cards. Let me trade you for 1. Now I can stack these 2 up and make something really big happen.
Totally.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Darrell. And, a good example of that, just what you said, is the one game I played in that you ran at Gen Con 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, it would have been 2 years now. Man, or a year ago, excuse me. And we were against this just impossible threat. And these were all experienced players. And we were just like, I remember just as Darrell described it, we started that first round. And like my character figured out the weakness of the bad guy, meaning I could deal like 1 point of shock a round. Which is nothing. And the rest of the characters were all sitting there going like, yeah, exactly. We were all sitting there going, oh man, what are we going to do? But then as the cards kept going, by the end of it, we literally like played the cards just right. And not to spoil what happened exactly, but it was around the Maelstrom card, I believe. And we killed the big impossible opponent in one action by all contributing together. And as your players learn that and get that learning curve, even they can face more challenges. And it was nice because even the less combat-oriented characters, which is one thing I love about Torg, they were able to contribute in combat in a lot of ways. So there's, I guess, technically not really necessarily a non-combat-oriented character in Torg. If you really tried, you could do that, but even with all the other things. But just to kind of further your point there.
And we've got them in the day ones to show people that's how that works, right? We've got, the paleontologist. Guy's got nothing but a huge trick, doesn't have a gun, doesn't have anything. But it turns out a huge trick is devastatingly awesome because he's just setting up every bad guy to fail, especially once you figure out if you get them by 10 or more, it's over. Like, you can take them out. If they're a little scrub, you can trick them to fall off a building and they're done. That opens up all these storytelling possibilities once people get it. And that's another piece of advice for new GMs. On that player's call, like for your big bad, yes, stun them, hurt them, don't completely kill them or whatever. Do what's interesting. On a scrub, they're done. That player's call is how do you want to take this guy? How do you want to take him out with your trick? And just seeing your players light up like, oh man, I intimidated that guy, got the player's call, and he ran away. He's just out of the fight. I can do that? Yup, you can do that.
Yeah. And I would say for new GMs, tricks, intimidation, all those 4 interactions are something you don't see in a lot of role-playing games, to be honest. And so some of your players are not going to think that way. They're just going to think about chop, or cast some spells and see if they can whittle it away. But encourage them to use those interactions. Their strongest one, just especially characters who don't feel like they can contribute much. They're not very good with their gun or whatever. Focus on that. Sometimes it can be really useful to model that. If they see enemies doing something against them, maneuvering against them, then they'll start to realize the value of that interaction attack, and then they can start to deploy it on their own. Mm-hmm.
And the other easy in for that is the approved actions, since they mix up and you throw a card and you're like, oh, look, intimidates the approved action. And as a new GM or new player, that's when you go like, well, what does that mean? And then you go into it. It's like you can do this, and we very specifically on the character sheet put the interaction attacks in a separate section together, so we can say, hey, look, it's those four. They all work the same way. Like they've got different special effects and trappings, but they're all kind of doing the same work. And and the like, yeah, when I'm teaching, I let the approved action guide that and be like, okay, not only, and the best thing is, it's like, cool, not only did you find out what an interaction got to do, but you also got to get a card for it. And we just talked about how incredibly powerful the cards are. And that's a big deal. And so, yeah, there we go. I was going to say, we just got our windows messed up a little bit. We had the,
Yeah.
But, all right. Sorry. It's
Brian
a new
for a second. It's totally weird feeling.
Yeah. I know. It's really weird.
It's a new technology, people. We're figuring it out.
Yep.
But kind of the piggyback on the cards thing, though, in my experience, for new players, especially that are newer to Torg, the Cosmo cards, when you get them, they've got a lot of bad stuff on them. Some of them are like, I can't remember what set it is. I think Living Land, where it's like, there's a chance if, you run into a Dinos, you might summon the High Lord, It's like, who would want to play this? But they also give you some benefit, which I get that too, the possibilities, but also the story elements of that. And like the example I was giving earlier, and Darrell did too, and, Brian to a degree as well, where the players working together against something that's, unbeatable, going through that fight and that struggle, and then coming out, as Darrell said, as the momentum kind of builds and then you win. Oh man, those are some of the best sessions. So, encourage your players to not be scared of using your Cosmo cards. That's going to create probably something really interesting and a memorable session, which is why we all play, to have fun.
Yeah.
Which also ties in with possibilities. The possibilities are super important for your characters. And so as a new GM, don't forget about those. Don't forget to award them. And don't be afraid to encourage your characters to play those cards, like he was just talking about. It's going to complicate things for them a little bit, but it'll all be worth it because they need those possibilities. They need them.
Yeah. And here's the thing about, like, because this is something, we see this in Savage Worlds too. People forget to give out bennies. People forget to give out possibilities. This is one of the reasons that the Cosmo cards exist, is literally to just force you to give people possibilities. Like it's your safety valve, and you don't have to play it, but if you're out of possibilities, then suddenly you're like, well, maybe I will let Barrow Cop here because I need 3 possibilities really bad. Absolutely. It's fair, right? And there are a lot of Destiny cards that award possibilities too, or take the place of possibilities. So we try to protect a new GM from that pitfall, because if you're out of possibilities, the game is not as fun to play. So we're going to find all of these ways for players to get possibilities on their own, so you're not under the entire weight of that as a GM. Like, yes, absolutely, somebody says like a fun quip, boom, give them a possibility. Someone does something that improves the theme of the game, that hits that tone for it, absolutely give them a possibility. And that's a hard habit to get into, but once you get into that habit, you're going to miss it on other games, because it's training your players, much like, like a sea at SeaWorld or something, a seal at SeaWorld. Like, you did something cool, here's your fish, right? Like, here's a possibility. Like, I'll keep doing that thing. And so it makes your game more, over time, you get the game that you want. You get the game that you're rewarding, that you're building through rewards. Caveat, be careful what you reward for that exact reason. I tend to not reward puns and things like that, like even if I laugh at them, because I know if I do that, like that opens this floodgate.
Should be a comical game, if that's not your thing.
It is like that's it's over at that point. So I try to be very careful what I do award possibilities for, and it's great because players will be like, "Hey, that was a really good one. Are you going to give them a penny for that?" I'm like, nope. Hell no. And here's why.
Yeah, but the possibilities, warding him. I also Ross Watson gave some of the best advice, and I was playing with him a Savage Worlds game a few years back or so. He said you should never end a session with many bennies, possibilities, or whatever at all. That's what they're there for. So some people get in the habit of hoarding them, and it defeats the purpose of what they're there for. They're for, a lifesaver if you need to soak, or if you want to just, you're like, your character feels this is a very important moment, you want to make that happen. Low possibility, don't be afraid to use them. I think some newer players are scared to, kind of like potions in old school D&D, because once it's gone, it's gone. But you can always get them back, to Brian and Darrell's point both.
Mm-hmm.
So new players, always encourage them, spend your possibilities. I always advise keep one to soak, just in case you got that big baddie that just hammers you. That's it.
Depends on where you are in the adventure, I guess.
Right. And once you're
True.
experienced with a GM and that happens, find an excuse. Like, no, use that last possibility. Find an excuse to give that person another possibility.
Well said. Well said.
So there's a good question I see. What is a possibility in terms of game fiction? And how do you bridge the gap between the mechanical effects and what's happening on screen?
Well, how I've always viewed them, and like I'll even describe it, I'll let the player, or maybe them, a big one is soaking. It's a big one where I say, it's possibility. So there's different realities. Even Torg Eternity is a different kind of timeline, if you will, or possibility of events from regular Torg. So I always view it as, well, in one reality, you see it as it slips through your mind, as the bullet flies and hits you in the chest and you fall down. You reach out, bend reality, and warp it so that bullet now just kind of barely scrapes the side of your shoulder instead. Do what you will with it. That's the beauty of being a GM. But that's how I've always kind of interpreted it myself. What about you, Brian? What do you think, buddy?
Similar to that, yeah. For new players, I try to explain it almost like in a split second, your character is sorting through several different outcomes subconsciously, not even intending to do it, but just picking the best outcome. It's just something that they can do that Ords can't do. Which one of the interesting things about Torg is it's not the only game that that has something like that. Like Savage Worlds has bennies, but it's the only one that I know of that works it into the fiction, so that there's a connection, right?
Exactly.
It's not just a thing that you have; it's part of the story. Yeah, and I think that's what's crucial. One of the main crucial differences, I think, between it and some of the other games.
And I don't know how well it comes out, but we try to write that. Like, that's in the rules. That one of the things that we say about Storm Knights is, reality pushed them, Storm Knights get to push back. The strength with which they can push back is that pool of possibilities. The more possibility energy they have, the better they are, the stronger they are. When reality is like, you get stepped on by a dinosaur, they go, no, I don't. Like, that's not how that went down. And we put, I don't think this came out anywhere. When we were playtesting, we had a lot of talk about what soaking looks like. And I think like there's a few fragments of it in some of the adventures where we discuss it. And someone mentioned that made it into the Jezreel Chronon fiction. I was like, yes, like this is how we play tested it and how I've always thought about it. So I tried to get it like when we actually wrote fiction, like oh hey, I am writing this. I can describe like how we do it essentially. That yeah, like you're just like John says, like oh yeah, you got shot in the chest and they boom down you go, but you're a little bit above and outside reality, and you can be like whoa, rewind that back. And one of the descriptions that we did was when you were soaking, and this didn't make it, but this is a fun like aside. When you were soaking, it's like you're just speeding through, like you're speed dating all these different versions of yourself. So like for like a split second, like you got a beard, and then you don't, and then you're like, oh, here's the guy that lived through that. All right, boom, boom, and then you settle in on that.
Right.
Like that.
I think some of the confusion. Yeah. I think some of the confusion just comes from the term soaking, which is one of the sort of cross pollinations with Savage Worlds. It sounds like you're actually absorbing the damage somehow, which you're not really. It's just a way of explaining how you are picking
Right.
subconsciously. And this message for Prince Earwig. I think it's I don't think the characters do know what they're doing. It's all subconscious,
I
split
think they
second.
do.
You think they
I
do?
think they
They're
absolutely.
thinking
I think
about
they
it.
I think they do too. Yeah, I think it's an active thing.
Yeah, it is an active thing. Like when you, the player, spin that chip and say, "I want to warp reality. I want to change this." That is the character pushing back and
That's
saying,
true. The
"No."
character does know. Yeah, I always imagine it as like
Mhm.
the picking process is subconscious, but yeah, the choice to
That
do
I
that
agree with.
is conscious. Yeah,
Yeah,
otherwise
and
you.
well, that's the thing is it could be either way if we really wanted it to be. That's what's wonderful about the game, you know. So
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the comment, the "not today" is what we say. We got absolutely.
you gotta-
Concert.
absolutely.
I got 4 chips of "not today." Then now it's like, oh, today, okay.
Yeah. It also reminds me a little bit of that Prince of Persia game from a while back, where you could rewind
Yeah.
time a little bit and try again. Yeah.
Yep.
Similar.
Really good example.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of thing, and like we often do it in terms like I tend to describe it in terms of time, but it's not really time. Like you're not rewinding.
Yeah.
You're just going down a different path. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the flesh wounds and other classics. Like you get hit, and it's like, oh yeah, you still got hit, but this time it grazed you. You know. Like, oh, enough to know.
Oh yeah,
that was a close one.
movie trope. Yeah. The person bleeding out, and then when they pull their shirt back, they realize, oh, it's just a flesh wound.
Yeah, we definitely don't use any movie tropes in Torg, none at all.
Not at all. It's a game about it. It's a fantastic question come in the chat. So what's a key rule that's easy for a new GM to miss?
I'd say firing into melee is usually one. Even I did until I can't remember who it was. It was some random player. They were like, "Well, what if it isn't supposed to be?" It was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." Yeah. So that mechanic where it's heck, I can't even remember if it's even or odd where you hit a random person or not off the top of my head. But yeah, that's a big
easy
one
way
for
to
me.
remember that is it's odd hits a friend because a 1 is a bad result.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Easy way to remember that. 20 good, 1 bad. Even good,
There you go.
odd bad.
This is Robert just jumping in here for a second, only because I think during the game that I played with Darrell and Greg, Darrell is like I was shooting into melee, and I could tell Darrell was like, no, don't do it, basically, and he didn't say that, but I could feel it from him. But I was like, I'm doing it, and I use a possibility to re-roll like twice, and he's like, oh my god. It was a good time.
Yeah,
I'm out though.
yeah. No, right? But that's the fun of it, and that's why a lot of people hate that rule. I love it. It's like my favorite rule in the game because it's that nail biting moment, like because we're operating under the conceit that when we're fighting, like these are like 10-second long rounds and people are moving around, so you can't. It's not just 2 people standing there and you can shoot past very easily. Like anytime you're firing into that, it's a risk. And I love that, it's a risk worth taking. You're like, hey, look, I got the possibilities. I'm going to take the shot. Like, this is important. Let's do this. And it's also like super fun in that you get that gamut of emotion, like, oh, and then you like spend a possibility on it and it switches from even to odd. You're like, oh man, it's a really great hit now, but it's not against the bad guy anymore. Hero card, anyone? Can we keep going with this? And I don't know. I love it. And I get the frustration around it. And this is what I would consider an advanced rule. And here's the other piece of advice in general is when you're starting out, don't think about any of this stuff. Like get the base rolls down and you're fine. This is all layers that you add onto it. When you're more advanced, remember, it's actually really super cheap to just step out of combat. Like they don't get a free hit or anything like that. You become vulnerable because we wanted some, like just a pittance. Like a pittance so people aren't just running around in circles or whatever. But it's very cheap to just be like, okay, I'm getting out of here. And good guys get to choose the order that they go in on their turn. So it's like, hey, melee guy, get out of there before I shoot. Like, well, there's no reason for me to risk, blowing your head off here. So that's something that people can forget. Like, generally, you get to pick your order.
Just to finish out that thought, the only thing that I would suggest also is keep in mind the world laws of where you are. Sometimes, as a GM, sometimes I can forget. I know the feeling, but I sometimes forget very specific stuff about world laws. So keep those in mind. Use those table tents. Those can help you a lot.
Yeah, those table tents, right? And that was one in one of our very first playtests. Like, when we were doing the day one, we were playtesting those, and that was how I marked that they were in the living land. Like, we had this moment, like, and I had printed out like the stupid thing with the roll. I was like, boonk, and I set it on the table, and Shane was like, "That's cool. Like, now, like, we get the reality changed." And that's why we printed them and tried to make them up. And of course, Living Land's the one that's got a typo on it, and I had to build a damn sticker. Can't win for losing. But the rule that's super easy to forget, and can make a huge difference. Defending is not always a great option, but especially when it's an approved action, you can pull your action. If the bad guys are going first, you can say, I am defending right now. You burn your action, you go to defend, you roll that bonus at least +1. And if the bad guys are breathing down your neck, that's a big deal, right? Like, so that one's big. And the other thing is, remember, when you do that roll, if you have an action card or adrenaline or whatever, that bonus, that +3, that applies to the bonus that you generated for your defense. And that can suddenly make defend much, much better. So don't hesitate to spend a possibility on that or an action card to boost that up. It's very easy to miss, but it can, if you're in a tough spot, it can save your life.
And I would, thinking about one more rule, because I remember I had to think on this because I forgot about it the first game I ran. I was like, gosh, they're healing like left and right. Was that what it's? You're only allowed one kind of healing, like type per scene per character. Is that correct? Something along those lines. So, like, if you had like a miracle, you can only use that on one character per scene.
So,
and
there's
spell, yeah.
It's not a general limitation. It's a limitation of that particular miracle, because healing very, very powerful, and essentially what we didn't want is, I've got heal. So, all right, we've finished that fight and everyone's got 3 wounds. Cool. I've got heal. There's no other economy that says I can't heal all the time, so everyone is healed.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
there's no like slots or something to burn, right? If you can,
so,
you just roll.
Yeah, so on that particular miracle, and we didn't want it, like original, we limited it to, it was once a scene you could heal. I thought that was too weak. So we said, okay, it's like once a target per scene. So you can still stack it up over scenes or whatever. And I've got 4 allies hurt. I don't have to be like, well, I like you best, so you get the healing and everyone else gets the suffer. But there's a couple great questions that scrolled by.
One of them was
yes. So before we do that one, an easy one was when you disconnect in your equipment phases, when you reconnect, do you get your stuff back? Absolutely, right? So when you are disconnected, you're Schrodinger's hero. You might be transforming, you might not. Anything that's caught up in those other axioms that we're not sure about is caught in limbo and can't use da 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 da. Once it is resolved one way or another, if you reconnect, that cat came out of the box alive. It's got all its stuff, it's fine. You're back to normal. If you transform anything that didn't fit, poof, it transforms too. And we have fun with that in the adventures with planes and things like that transforming, like an aisle. Like, and this is why ords do not fly over places where planes can't exist, because you're probably fine, but if something comes up and your plane turns into a boat, 10,000 feet in the air, you go, well, did my parachute transform too? Yeah, sure did. Oh, but in general, if it's Schrodinger's hero, if you reconnect, all your stuff comes back with you. So now, fiction-wise, Disconnection, what's that look like to you? Anyone want to take that one? Because I've been talking a lot.
Oh, sorry, I was kind of in some video problems there. I don't know if you guys can hear me or see me or anything. Yeah, sorry, that's why I was quiet.
I thought I got disconnected.
To me, Disconnecting, there's a really good image, I thought, an artistic representation of what it looks like disconnecting in the core rule book, where it's like got somebody they got armor and a machine, they're slowly phasing out. I kind of looked at it, used to kind of look at it that way. What's that?
That's Torg, the dwarf, yeah. It's one of the only pictures of her outside of her armor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess it is. I didn't even think about that. But yeah,
it's really... is using a machine gun in the living room. That's a 4-case contradiction. What was you thinking?
Yeah, but that's a good one. But I also looked at it as literally things just kind of melding into something else, like the Darrell's point of something different. That's how I always viewed it. And even you're of course going to be roughly the same. You might just be wearing different, instead of a suit of plate mail armor, now you've got Duraflex plate on or something like that, and where you had like these spells, maybe you have got cybernetics to kind of make up for what the magic used to do. Something similar was how I always did it fictionally. It's more of it's I guess a gradual transition, slowly like fading into that. One fades and one fades. One possibility fades out, and this one kind of fades in to overlap it. That's how I looked at it fictionally. Is how it goes. But the person still has all the same memories and everything.
Yeah, we always did it as like a rapid jittering thing, and that's why it's like, oh yeah, you've got this armor here and that armor there, but really you don't have either at the moment, because it's like clicking back and forth between them as you're trying to fight it and have one you emerge from that, and that also keeps it simple in terms of which armor value do I use while I'm slowly fading from Kevlar to plate? The answer is neither. You don't have that armor. You have neither one. It's in limbo. It's somewhere else. It's still resolving which one you're actually wearing. And in the meantime, if you get shot in the face, you got neither.
Yeah. Which that brings me to just one random point I thought of, though. Something, Darrell, I think you and I were talking after I ran a game at Gen Con, and, somebody said, or mentioned, people complain, well, it's almost impossible to kill Storm Knights. Well, my very good friend Nick, that's done a lot of play testing for me over the years, was playing a character, and we were in the final encounter, and he rolled a natural 1. And it was just like, and he was like, what can I do? It was like, not much. You're just kind of out of it, buddy. And then there was this massive attack, a breath weapon from the final creature, and that was that for his character. So, I mean, I would just advise, there is that one thing. You roll a natural 1, and you disconnect. That's bad for a Storm Knight. You're literally kind of an ord at the time, so for temporarily until you can reconnect, hopefully. So, just one thing to be wary of. Yeah,
but while disconnected, you can still use your cards. And you can still play for the critical moment. So when you're screwed like that and you just got breathed on by a dragon and you're like, I'm about to die. If you don't have opponent fails, you ask the table, does anybody else have one? And if so, both of you critical moments you can trade. That'll save your life. That's your one get out of jail for free. Now it blows your critical moment for the whole game, but you're alive.
I also saw a question a little while ago about encounter balance. That was kind of interesting. Other games, obviously D&D is very concerned about encounter balance. In Torg, it's it's more difficult. It's not as cut and dry. We don't when we're building our adventures, we don't have a spreadsheet with points to allocate to monsters and things like that. We have to just sort of understand the sort of the basic level and what numbers would be appropriate for that area. But as we discussed earlier in the talk, cards and possibilities and smart play are so important, way more important, I think, than just the raw numbers on your monster threat card. You know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We talked about that a little bit earlier with the
Mhm.
with the card play, where when you're balancing a fight. So one, since you're building it for your own group, you know their rough experience level, right? You know, and if they suck at cards, you know, if they're not good at the card play or familiar with it, if your bad guys have numbers that are like one or two better than theirs, or you've got basically two bad guys per good guy, it's going to work out fine. Much more than that, it's going to be really tough. Still doable, because if you can live 3 rounds, even with bad card play, you're going to win. You know, so in some ways, don't stress it. You know, just like throw some stuff out. And then the other thing too is like if the worst case scenario is that you lose a fight, that's okay. Storm Knights are really, really hard to kill, like by design. Like
Really are.
beat them up, you know, and like anytime you're going to have a fight that you think could be tough, what's the way out? As a GM, just think, what's the way out? If a reality storm blows in, fine. They don't know how reality storms work. Whatever. We don't either. Like they just happen, right? Fine, a reality storm blows in. Fight's over. You survived the 3 rounds and we went to this other thing. Have an out. As long as you've got an out, throw whatever crazy stuff you want. A beta bad guy, I don't care, right? If High Lord shows up, Pirate Cause, I'm going to kill you right now. Do you have an out? If you've got an out, let them jack them up. Who cares?
Yeah, and combats don't always have to end in death anyway. If you're up against somebody who's intelligent, they're probably more likely to just capture you instead, especially if you're in the Nile Empire. You know, so don't think that all fights have to be death matches, right? They don't necessarily have to be.
And there's a really subtle one that we introduced in the core book. So John Wick's backer character, he was the leader of this organization that seed the Stormers with secret Storm Knights or get Stormers to work for the good guys. So we see this idea that some of the bad guys that you're fighting could be double agents. And so that's our excuse to say, don't kill every Stormer you meet. Like they're dangerous, but they might be working for you. And also GM, that can be your out on that losing fight. Where it's like, that particular Stormer, turns out he's working for Operation Eris and helps you guys at a critical, subtle moment. Now, that doesn't work for all the bad guys. Like, if they're particularly evil, it's like, nope. like that's not going to happen. But if it's especially just like a mid-tier fight with a random guy that went really badly, because sometimes the dice are just really evil, like in the game that we're playing tonight, I crit failed 4 times.
Jeez.
Yeah, and lived. Y'all welcome.
All right, guys. This is the disembodiment of
right?
This is the disembodiment
and
of
I
Robert
feel like
coming in.
balance.
We've got to call it. Where I know you guys could talk about this forever, and I enjoy listening to it. That's for sure. But let's go ahead and call it for now. If you want to hear more about Torg stuff, Brian, Greg, Lehman, and Darrell will be on at 8 o'clock Pacific tonight for writing for the Infiniverse Exchange. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out at 8 o'clock Pacific tonight. So thank you, Darrell. Thank you, John. And thank you, Brian. And we'll see you guys around.
And thank you, everyone, for showing up. Thanks for paying attention.
Thanks, everybody. Great questions.
Oh, yeah.
Cheers, guys.